The shooting range. In this episode, pages of history, an adventure of the Tokyo Express, tips and tricks, different types of rockets that you can use against ground targets, and metal beasts, the fastest helicopter in the game. Meet the G-Lynx, a modern attack helicopter placed among the premium British tech at BR 10.0. It's basically completely analogical to the Mark I model from the main tree, with the only difference being that the engines and the propeller were slightly modified to set a new world speed record. During its test flights in 1986, they had managed to accelerate the G-Lynx to 400 kilometers per hour. So today, the shooting range presents you the machine that is officially one of the fastest helicopters ever created by mankind. It's driven by two engines, each with a capacity of 1,185 horsepower. No built-in weapons here. All of them are suspended. You can choose between an offensive 20mm cannon, pods with unguided rockets, up to 8 of the Hellfire or the TOW-2 ATGMs, or 4 of the Stinger air-to-air homing missiles. But there's always a price to pay for the speed and the opportunity to carry such a decent arsenal through the air. The price here is, as usual, the protection. There is none. Now, let's talk about tactics. There aren't a lot of armament options, so the choice is fairly obvious. We'll recommend taking 4 Stingers, or 2 Stingers and 1 gun, and complete the set with 8 additional ATGMs. First of all, you need to deal with enemy helicopters. This is what the air-to-air missiles and the cannon are for, with flares protecting you against retaliatory launches. There are 192 of them, so there's no need for saving. They'll last long enough as they are. Having cleared the sky, switch to ground targets. Your tracking device and thermal sight are especially useful here. Thanks to them, tanks and SPAAs will have nowhere to hide. And SPAAs, of course, are your priority targets. It's extremely dangerous to be distracted by anything else while at least one of them is anywhere around. However, it's useful to remember that the Hellfire's flight range is not too inferior to the anti-aircraft missiles. So, if your ATGM doesn't reach a certain SPAA, chances are that you're relatively safe, since the enemy most likely won't be able to hit you with an anti-aircraft missile either. And when you are at launch distance, then it's simple. Capture the target, launch the ATGM, and prepare to dodge the enemy's retaliatory rocket. Then, as soon as you've successfully eliminated the main threats, it's time to destroy some tanks. But have some patience. Don't launch the rockets at every enemy you see. First, you need to assess the situation. One of the opponents will almost certainly be holding an important position, impeding the advancement of your allies. Or, for example, somebody decides to flank your ground forces. Destroying such targets will bring your team much more benefit than just getting a random frag. And when you run out of rockets, don't fly around empty, relying on the cannon. You won't get a lot of frags with it. Instead, better immediately go and replenish the ammunition at your base. The Battle of Guadalcanal was unusual in every way. To be victorious, one of the sides had to prevail on land, in air and at sea at the same time. Losing in at least one of these components meant not achieving one's strategic goals, and bringing the whole operation to an extremely bloody stalemate. And although there weren't so many Japanese or American forces on the island, it was almost impossible to bring at least a company of soldiers to this remote piece of land, not to mention, after that, providing them with everything necessary for military operations. For Japan, it was harder than for anyone else. Its slow-speed transport ships couldn't even get close to the island. They were systematically intercepted by Allied aircraft. What could they do? It's unknown to this day who exactly in the Imperial Navy came up with the idea of using destroyers to deliver troops and supplies. Indeed, how much of these can a destroyer carry? Just in case, the answer is not a lot, but it's a fast-moving hunter that can swiftly get almost to the very shore in the dark, quickly unload, and when the dawn comes, it would already be beyond the combat radius of American carrier-based aircraft. The Japanese themselves called it rat transportation, while the Americans, blocked by all these reinforcements from establishing control over the Guadalcanal, gave this tactic a completely different name: the Tokyo Express. Attempts to intercept the night visitors started in the August of 1942 and lasted for almost a year. But even through losses, the Japanese were managing not only to successfully deliver most of their cargo, but also repel the attacks. Everything changed on the evening of July the 5th, 1943. Zoom in on U.S. Navy cruiser group led by Rear Admiral Walden Ainsworth. It consisted of 3 not at all new Brooklyn-class cruisers: Honolulu, St. Louis, and Helena, as well as 4 of the latest high-speed destroyers of the Fletcher class. That evening, they received an unexpected order: stop whatever they were doing, which was methodically shelling the jungle, and go east at full speed to intercept the next Tokyo Express. A joyless task, to say the least. For starters, intercepting enemies at night is tricky enough on its own, and in this case, only the Helena cruiser, the latest in the series, had radar equipment. The rest had to rely on optics and nighttime searchlights. But the Japanese ships weren't quite up to date themselves. The first and second transport groups consisted of 7 of the Mutsuki, Kageru, and Fubuki class destroyers, all assembled way back in the early 30s. Only the Niitsuki, the lead ship of 3 support destroyers, belonged to the more modern Akizuki class, and it even had radar, although quite primitive. The most surprising thing, though, was in spite of everything, the Japanese were in fact the first ones to notice the enemy that evening. Rear Admiral Akiyama ordered the support group to move closer, while the rest were to stop the landing and also engage in battle as soon as they could. The destroyers fired torpedoes. From the first minutes of the battle, both sides got fatally unlucky. The American cruisers gave a unanimous burst of fire against the enemy flagship destroyer, Niizuki, and quickly went down along with the admiral and his entire staff, decapitating the Japanese convoy at once. And just a couple of minutes later, a Japanese torpedo destroyed the bow of the Helena cruiser, the only American ship equipped with a radar. The American destroyers had no choice but to start saving the crew from the sinking Helena, while the 2 remaining cruisers were blindly firing into the darkness, praying that the enemy wouldn't think of launching torpedoes toward the lights coming from their firing weapons. But what about the Japanese? Having lost their command, they began putting down smoke screens. After a few minutes, the Nagatsuki destroyer had gone aground at full speed, having lost itself in its own smoke. The remaining ships scattered and went east without finishing the landing. In the morning, as soon as the sun had come up, Nagatsuki had become the rightful prey of the American deck-based dive bombers. However, that morning couldn't be called successful for the U.S. Navy Command. Exchanging an entire cruiser for 2 Japanese destroyers wasn't that much of a victory. Nevertheless, this moment truly became a turning point in the whole operation.
It was the first time they had managed to successfully disrupt a landing on Guadalcanal, and the offensive actions of the Japanese in the Pacific Ocean stopped, exactly then and there in Kula Bay. But, of course, at that moment, it hadn't yet become that obvious. War Thunder has many different types of rockets: high explosive, armor-piercing, ones designed to destroy air and sea targets, etc. But today, we'll talk about those that may come in handy against ground tech. Let's figure out this quite diverse type of weaponry, at least in general terms, and then give a couple of tips to those of you who enjoy killing tankers. Let's start with the simplest ones: the high-explosive HVAR, the RP-3, and the RS, plus the armor-piercing RBS. The difference between high-explosive and armor-piercing rockets is the same as between tank rounds of those types. High-explosive ones can easily destroy light armored tech and pierce the more protected opponents into the roof of the hull and turret, but frontal and side armor of tanks will usually be too tough for them. The Soviet RBS rockets, though, if we stick to the same analogy, can be compared with rounds containing explosive filler. They allow you to pierce the enemy not only through the roof, but also through the side, and at the same time still inflict a lot of damage. But if you use these, the fights against light armored tech becomes a bit trickier. The rocket can pass right through the machine and only detonate afterwards when once on the ground. In all other cases, it's not at all difficult to use them. Just be sure that you hit the tank's vulnerable zone. Separately, it's worth highlighting rockets with cumulative warheads. The list includes the German Panzerblitz, the American Mighty Mouse, the French SNEB, etc. They're quite low weight, so there might be several dozens of them on board, sometimes more than 100. They can cause severe hull damage to light armored tech, but one rocket won't do much damage against a seriously protected target. Therefore, they're the most efficient when you fire several of them at once, especially since their initial amount encourages you to be the kind of a big spender. Then there are the Tiny Tim anti-ship rockets. They're unique in their own way. Their intended purpose is to sink ships, but they can cope with ground targets as well, since the warhead here is extremely powerful. More than 60 kilograms of TNT. It's almost like a 500-pound British bomb. The trick is that the rocket's engine only starts after it separates from the pylon, which is bad for both the rocket's flight path and its accuracy. And letting the Tiny Tim off the leash from a short distance is also not a good idea. An explosion this powerful can often destroy the carrier aircraft itself. So these rockets are good at medium distances when accuracy is still decent, but the blast wave is no longer a threat. There are also some interesting samples in the Germans' arsenal. Their 210mm rockets were often mounted at an upward angle, as for example on the Bf-109 G-6. The designers decided that such an arrangement would facilitate the destruction of enemy bombers. However, the explosive charge in them is quite enough for destroying targets on the ground as well. They're not as deadly as the Tiny Tim, of course, but efficient nonetheless. The problem here is actually hitting the target. You won't be able to hit a tank from horizontal flight. The rockets will just go up, and you need to have a very high angle if you want to launch them from a dive. Such a maneuver might very easily become your last. It's important to find a balance, an angle that allows the rockets to go exactly on target, but leaves you at least a little time to exit the dive and not hit the ground. As soon as you figure it out, the frags will start coming your way. Finally, on the Me-410 and the Bf-110G2, the rockets are located at an incredible angle, so high that if you zoom in, you'll see that the aiming mark goes somewhere beyond the screen. You'd be surprised, but even this doesn't interfere with successful destruction of ground tech, if you've got enough dexterity. To make aiming more comfortable, you can shift the camera along the vertical axis so that the mark is always visible. This can be done in the control settings. Go to Camera Control, and then View in Battle, Air, parenthesis, Y-axis, close parenthesis. In general, keep in mind that it takes you a lot longer to use rockets compared to dropping bombs. You have to get close to your targets, which involves appearing in your enemy's sights more than once. On the other hand, rockets are a little less demanding on the skill of the pilot, and usually there are just a lot more of them. That's probably it. Time to move on to the answers to your questions that you've asked in the comments. The first message was sent by a player called Richie Mate. Will players ever have the possibility to choose what tanks they have to destroy in Test Drive? As of now, the Test Drive contains a set of machines with various grades of protection. The idea behind that is to let you test the whole variety of weaponry against them and figure out which works best against what armor. If that's still not enough, well, you've got your answer below your comment. But we'll repeat it for everybody else as well. There's a great user mission called Tank Polygon that you can download from live.warthunder.com. There, you'll have 100 tanks at your disposal, plus some other useful features for testing penetration, ammo replenishment, respawn of the destroyed targets, and faster reload. Sky Streak writes, "The driver is placed here, next to the fuel tanks. Seems safe." Laugh all you want, mate, but it's true. The only place where fuel tanks blow up with a huge explosion is on a set of a Hollywood action blockbuster. And IRL, a fuel tank of diesel fuel, works as an additional armor more often than not. It's really hard to set it on fire, unlike the engine compartment, for example. Then there is a question sent by Cade Oswald. What do the commander optics do? Do they have an effect if they're broken in Sim or another game mode? Right now, the optics in the game are modeled more for the looks and visual authenticity and have no real effect on the gameplay. Even in SB, you usually observe the battlefield in third person above the tank. Plus, something tells us that the players wouldn't be happy if breaking one very fragile module would deprive them of normal visibility. Taron wants to know, what is the fastest Soviet ground vehicle? Let's see. The fastest Soviet ground tech. Yeah, that would be the BTR-152A. You can accelerate it to 83 kph in realistic battles. And if we're talking about reverse speed as well, we'd also like to mention, for example, that Object 906, which can go faster than 70 kph in both directions. Another question comes from that guy. No, not that one. The other guy. Yeah, that guy. Can you do a tank hill climb challenge to see what tank climbs the hills best? We'll think about it. If the tests look interesting enough, we'll do it in one of the upcoming episodes. And the last message for today was written by the Mats07. Where do you get all the questions from the comments? Thunder Show? The shooting range, etc.? We do read all comments under every video on our channel. When it comes to the hotline, we usually take those that you've left under the previous episodes of the shooting range. Well, guys and gals, that's your lot for today. You've been happily watching The Shooting Range by Gaijin Entertainment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode, and click that bell. You like that, don't you? Also, leave a like, because hey, winter's over! And of course, tell us what you think in the comments below. So we'll see you in a week.